Gonzaga has their eyes set on one of the top small forwards in the 2026 recruiting class. Can they snag another high-level recruit from the state of Utah?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Friday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Randy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet is a win. Well, the Zags have a new recruiting target, a small forward out of the 2026 class. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to discuss tonight's WCC Tournament action. San Diego beating Pacific on Thursday. They're going to line up against LMU. We also got another first-round game between Portland and Pepperdine. Winners of those games playing Oregon State and Washington State on Saturday. So we'll take a look at that, what it means for the bracket going forward. And then we'll close out the show with some unfortunate Zags in the NBA news. Lots of injuries for our Zags playing at the next level, including a season ender for one of our beloved Zags. We'll talk about that to close out the show. We'll start here with some recruiting news. Haven't had a lot of recruiting updates throughout the season, typically focus on games, of course, but also just hasn't been a whole lot of action on the recruiting side. But the Zags are now known to be pursuing a 6'6" small forward from Provo, Utah, named Dean Ruckert. Ruckert is from Timpview High School, which is in Provo. He is the 45th ranked player currently in the 2026 recruiting class. That is at 247 Sports. 247 also has composite rankings, which have him at number 50. So it seems like there's a pretty good consensus on him being right in just inside or right around that top 50 in the 2026 class. He is a top 20 small forward in the class. Again, that's consensus. Everywhere has him within or around the top 20 among small forwards in the class. He's also the second ranked player in the state of Utah for the 2026 class. Obviously, AJ Dibansa reclassified from 2026 to 2025 and will be joining BYU next year. He's currently playing at Hurricane High School in Utah. So he would have been number one pretty clearly had he stayed in the 2026 class. But regardless, we're talking about a shot maker, a good versatile defensive player, 6'6". Other places have listed him at 6'7" here in Ruckert. A guy that really could fill a lot of different kind of roles for Gonzaga. He's being pursued by a handful of other programs. Unsurprisingly, BYU and Utah are both schools that have been in the mix here at times. Utah Valley also in the mix as well. The post that indicated Gonzaga was interested in Ruckert listed 5 schools that have been contacting him the most. Those schools were Gonzaga, of course, as well as BYU, Washington, Stanford, and Louisville. So a little bit of a variety here, obviously, mostly some West Coast flavor, but Louisville has been a program that not only landed a couple of transfers from BYU last year under Coach Pat Kelsey, but they really like floor spacing. They like shooters. Pat Kelsey's recruited successfully over on the West Coast before, so not a huge surprise to see them in the mix. Gonzaga has not officially offered him, or at least it is not publicly known that Gonzaga has offered Ruckert. That does not necessarily mean that they have not made him an offer. Just haven't seen that come through on 247 or On3 or any of the other places that tend to break news of this nature. But we do know Ruckert has offers from BYU, Stanford, and Washington. We also know that he took an official visit to Washington. So Washington is continuing to contact him, has made him an offer, and has had him on campus. So that certainly puts them in a comfortable position at this point. Danny Sprinkle, the former head coach at Utah State, so probably had an opportunity to see him in his 1 year with the Aggies before moving on to Washington. Ruckert has also taken an official visit to Utah as well, and has offers from UNLV and Utah Valley. So lots of different interests, again, mostly West Coast flavor at this point. That's pretty unsurprising for players who are playing still at local high schools and who are a year plus away from starting at the collegiate level. If he continues to rise in the rankings, does well in the summer circuit, it's possible we'll start to see some programs from farther away outside of Louisville start to show some interest here. But certainly for Gonzaga, they've had a lot of success when they kind of show interest in rising prospects, the way that Davis Fogel was a rising prospect, going back a little bit, Braden Huff, Corey Kispert, guys of that nature. So it'll be interesting to see if they can really kind of throw their weight around and potentially land somebody like Ruckert here, a high-profile player in this 2026 class. Because frankly, Gonzaga hasn't been very active in the 2026 recruiting class, and this isn't unusual. I think a lot of people have felt like Gonzaga's, like, we haven't heard as much recruiting stories and we haven't been kind of as involved. And to some extent in the last couple of years, at times Gonzaga hasn't had a lot of roster spots open. Like last year, people were like, well, why aren't they pursuing a bunch of freshmen? It's like everybody came back except Anton Watson. Like they just didn't have a lot of room to make any, and they did add a freshman in Ismaila Diani, of course, very late in the cycle, an international player, but they didn't have a lot of room. Now, next year, which is, of course, the 2025 class, Gonzaga does have room. You know, we know that Ryan Nemhart and Nolan Hickman and Ben Gregg and Caleb Battle are all departing the program. They are all out of eligibility. They are gone. That is unquestionable. We also have suspicion that potentially some combination of Graham Ike, Michael Ajayi, and Steele Venters may not be in the program going forward. All of them have the ability and eligibility to return. So it's not a confirmed thing that any of them are gone, but Graham Ike has been in college for a very long time. It's possible he decides to move on and start his pro career. Steele Venters' health is a huge factor. If he is healthy, I suspect he will return. But being able to return from two very significant back-to-back knee injuries is not an easy task. Michael Ajayi was, until very recently, not eligible to return for next year, but the rules changed regarding junior college players and their eligibility. So he has the opportunity to come back, but he may have already set his mind on choosing to go somewhere else professionally, most likely for the next year. So Gonzaga going to lose 4, could lose 7. Obviously, more could change. In the transfer portal era, there's no guarantees that anybody will be back on the roster next season. So, but at the bare minimum, we know Gonzaga is going to have at least 4 spots available next year. 2 of them will be filled by Braden Smith, the transfer guard from Colgate, who is redshirting this year, as well as Jalen Warley. 3 of these spots will be filled because Jalen Warley is coming in as a redshirt. He's already sitting on the Gonzaga bench this year. He will be eligible for his final year next year. Braden Smith, as we mentioned, and then, of course, Davis Fogel, the one freshman who is committed to join the program in the 2025 recruiting class. But so Gonzaga only has 1 guaranteed spot available, and we know that they love pursuing the transfer portal. This is, again, all for 2025. But 2026, again, there's plenty of opportunities. So we'll see if Gonzaga continues to get more involved in this class. And again, just because we don't know a whole lot, you see some information, some leaks, some stuff, but Gonzaga's always played things fairly close to the vest. So there's probably players in 2025 and 2026 that Gonzaga has talked to, is pursuing, is considering making an offer to, things of that nature that they just hasn't been fully reported or revealed at this point. We do know in 2026, one of the main players Gonzaga was pursuing was Sam Funches, one of the top-ranked centers in the class from Mississippi. He was actually scheduled to come on an official visit in February, decided not to come on that visit after visiting Ole Miss. I think he's pretty likely locked into going to a different school, probably Ole Miss or maybe Mississippi State in the SEC. But an unfortunate miss for Gonzaga as a player that's very, very talented, would have been a great fit. But he was a rim-protecting 6'11" big. Gonzaga already kind of have that guy in Ismaila Diani, so maybe they're feeling a little bit better about missing out on Funches, but certainly worth keeping an eye here on Dean Ruckert, a guy who could come in 2026, develop within the program as a floor spacer, as a versatile defensive wing, the kind of player that we've seen Mark Few and the Zags really prioritize in recent years with guys like Fogel and Stromer and others in that mix. Well, folks, we're going to move on, talk about the WCC tournament. We have 1 game so far. San Diego wins the first game, the lowest seeded team in the conference, and they're the only team that's 1-0 in the conference tournament. We're going to talk about that and preview Friday's action coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, when the game tips off, the NBA action, it is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on all of it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or you just want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay right in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. It's great because when you win, you get paid instantly. Gonzaga right now, -155 to win the WCC tournament. They have the best odds to win the WCC tournament. St. Mary's is next at plus 155. Your dark horse, the Broncos of Santa Clara, plus 1,600. If you want to put a little bit of money on this tournament in Las Vegas, just join right now. New customers, reminder, you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. And we're talking WCC tournament action as it got underway on Thursday night between the number 10 seeded Pacific Tigers, the number 11 seeded Toreros of San Diego, and the Toreros. Steve Lavin's club picks up the W, 81-77, the final score. They will play number 7 seed LMU tonight. We'll preview that game here in a second. Big shout out to freshman Tony Duckett, who was named to the WCC All-Freshman team. He proved exactly why in a 21-point performance against the Tigers, 7 of 14 shooting for him. I think he was 7 of 8 from the free throw line as well. Toreros also got 20 points from Cody Clowett and 18 points, 8 boards from starting center Steven Jamerson II. A big factor in this game, Pacific just couldn't stop fouling, and the Toreros, great job of converting at the charity stripe. 27 of 30 from the free throw line for Steve Lavin's club. Pacific, their season ends eliminated in their first year under Coach Dave Smart, and I'm struck by a conversation I had with Coach Smart in the WCC Media Day back in mid-October, where he said basically, we're probably going to be bad in our first year. I'm paraphrasing, but honestly, he was very, very upfront and direct about that in front of a few of his players. He basically said, it's going to be a tough year. It's going to be a rebuilding year. My success in my coaching history has kind of started in year 2. So he always kind of had the expectation that his adjustment to this level, he was an assistant coach at Texas Tech prior to this, but most of his experience was coaching in Canada. He was kind of expecting like this might be a bit of a rough year, a transition year, and then we'll get better after that. And that was the case. This team went 9-24 on the year. They went 4-14 in the WCC. 2 of those 4 wins coming against Washington State. One of my favorite weird facts of this WCC season, that Pacific basically didn't beat anybody except Washington State, who they beat twice. They also beat USD in the regular season and LMU, non-conference, a couple of wins against non-power teams or non-D1 teams. They also beat San Jose State, Arc Pine Bluff, and Fullerton. Meanwhile, San Diego, who had, I think, a 15-game losing streak at one point in the WCC, finished far and away the worst record in the league. They advance. They will now play the 7 seed LMU Lions. This game is at 8:30 tonight, Friday night on ESPN+. If you don't got any late Friday night plans, you want to watch some WCC hoops, check this one out on ESPN+. FanDuel favoring LMU by 8.5 points. The winner of this game will play the 6-seeded Washington State Cougars on Saturday. The winner of that game will then play the number 3-seeded San Francisco Dons on Sunday. The winner of that game will play Gonzaga on Monday. Again, that fun step stool type conference tournament schedule for the WCC. LMU won both regular season games against San Diego. Most teams won all their regular season games against San Diego. LMU won by just 7 at home, 77-70, but they won 78-62 in the game on the road. LMU has a top 100 defense in the country per KenPom. They're coming in at number 95. Meanwhile, San Diego, 307th in adjusted offensive efficiency. So it's a bad offensive team against a above average, good-ish defensive team in LMU. I think the Lions take this. I think the Lions take this fairly handily. I think they would have felt pretty good against either Pacific or San Diego, but I think they're probably pretty happy to see San Diego in this game. Javon Porter should just absolutely feast against San Diego's defense. Caleb Stone-Carawell, their transfer, has had a very, very productive year as well. I expect those two guys to overwhelm what is a very young team for Coach Lavin and the Toreros. The other game, Friday night, number 8 seed Portland Pilots, Shantae Leggins' team going up against number 9 seeded Pepperdine Waves, 6 p.m. on ESPN+. FanDuel favoring Portland by just 2.5. The winner of this game will play the 5 seed Oregon State Beavers on Saturday. The winner of that game will play Santa Clara on Sunday. The winner of that game will play St. Mary's on Monday. Portland swept Pepperdine in the regular season. They beat them by exactly 20. In fact, I had to reread to make sure I had the scores correct because I put them in the notes and they're almost exactly the same. Portland beat Pepperdine at Pepperdine 84-64. and both teams just made an extra three-pointer in the other game at home for Portland, which was 87-67. Two 20-point wins for the Pilots. Again, they're only one spot ahead of Pepperdine in the standings, but they took care of this Waves team in the regular season. The Pilots finished the year 12-19 overall, 7-11 in the WCC. I had some nice wins. A nice win over Oregon State in particular at the Chiles Center. That was a big one. Oregon State really struggled on the road this year. For those of you who listened to Thursday's episode of Locked On Zags, we spoke with Rocco Miller, a bracketologist and also somebody who covers the West Coast Conference and mid-major basketball on the West Coast pretty frequently. And he mentioned he thinks Oregon State's very likely to advance against Santa Clara, but he's keeping a close eye on if Portland wins this game. He thinks Portland is going to have potentially enough juice to take down Oregon State and potentially set up a matchup against Santa Clara. I'd love it. I worked at UP for 2 years. For those of you who don't know, I think it'd be very fun to see the Pilots go on a little bit of a run here. This team has talent. Max McKinnon's one of the better newcomers to this conference. He had a 43-point game in the regular season. Austin Rapp's the best freshman in the conference, led the conference in three-pointers made, one of the best three-point shooting freshmen in the entire country as a 6'10" Australian big man. I think he causes some significant problems for this Pepperdine team, but there's some good scoring potential in this game. I mean, we're talking about Max McKinnon, like I said, one of the best newcomers in the conference, and Stefan Todorovic, who I think was second or third. I believe he finished third in the WCC in scoring this year, who's a transfer from San Francisco to Pepperdine. They also have Pacific transfer Mo Odom at the point guard position. So a lot of talent in this game between Portland and Pepperdine, despite it being a lower seeded matchup. I'm excited about this one. I'm excited to see, particularly if Portland can win. I don't think Pepperdine's got much of a chance against Oregon State, but I think if Portland wins, maybe they can do some stuff that makes life a little bit more difficult for the Beavers and Coach Wayne Tinkle on Saturday. Well, folks, we're going to move on, close out the show talking about the NBA. The NBA season, it's nearing the home stretch. And frankly, there's just way too many Zags who are watching it from the sidelines. We got some injury updates coming up in just a second. But first, folks, the Nissan Armada Pro 4X, the numbers, they're on an MVP level. With the ability to tow up to 8,500 pounds, it can quite literally carry the whole team plus the gear wherever you need it to go. It's powered by a twin-turbo V6 engine, delivering the strength and performance to handle highways, back roads, and everything in between. And with room for up to 8 people, the Armada Pro 4X is built for big crews, big adventures, and even bigger memories. So whether you're exploring off-road trails or rolling up to the arena, the Armada Pro 4X brings power, versatility, and style wherever you go. Take your adventures to new heights in the all-new Nissan Armada Pro 4X. Learn more at nissanusa.com. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Closing out the show with some NBA Zag updates. Not the most fun NBA Zag updates we've ever had. We have seen some fun performances recently. Zach Collins and Kelly Olynyk on their new teams have both played very well. At times, Kelly, of course, now with the New Orleans Pelicans in the Brandon Ingram trade, whereas Zach Collins now playing for the Chicago Bulls, who basically have nobody healthy or very few NBA caliber players. So Zach Collins has been playing huge minutes at the center position for the Bulls. He came there via San Antonio in the DeMar DeRozan, De'Aaron Fox 3-team trade that involved the Sacramento Kings. Those are the fun updates, but really we want to talk about the injuries, because we've seen quite a few Zags go down with injuries as of just in the last week alone. And one of them being a really critical one, Jalen Suggs, done for the year with the Orlando Magic. Really tough to see for Suggs, who's already dealt with injury issues a handful of times in his NBA career. He had arthroscopic surgery to remove cartilage fragment from his left knee. Surgery went well by all accounts. It sounds like he's going to make a full recovery. There's not really any concern about his long-term health at this point, so that is a promising sign for this Orlando club. But he's only played one game since January 3rd. He went down with the injury then. While ramping back up, he did get in the game a few weeks later in January 25th, and then been ramping up to get back into action. And unfortunately, the knee was still bothering him, and they made the decision to go with surgery to end his season, but to get him healthy, hopefully going into next year. On the season, in 35 games, Suggs played average 16 points per game, about 4 boards, 3.7 assists, and 1.5 steals, just under 49% for his effective field goal percentage. And again, the story for Suggs has unfortunately been injuries. 3 of his 4 NBA seasons have now been with 53 or less games played. played 53 games as a rookie. He played 48 games in his second year. And then in his third year, he finally had a fully healthy season, 75 games, finished 10th in Defensive Player of the Year voting, was kind of starting to look like he was turning the corner. And then this year, he put up great numbers. I mean, the 16 points and 4 boards are both career highs. He was getting a ton of steals. He was playing like one of the best defensive players in the conference and in the country. But unfortunately, his season ends now with just 35 games played. Hopefully he can get back and fully healthy going into his 4th year in the league with Orlando next year. Speaking of other injuries, the second member of the tricky trio who was in the NBA, Julian Strawther, now out a month with a knee sprain. He's going to be reevaluated in 4 weeks. This was announced on March 4th, so he'll be reevaluated by Denver's athletic training staff in early April. It doesn't mean he's going to return necessarily in early April. Maybe he does. Maybe he returns a week after that. Maybe he gets shut down for the rest of the regular season with the hopes of getting him back in time for the playoffs. It's unclear what that might look like for Strawther at this point. He's been a really big part of Denver's bench mob this year. As a rookie, he played like 11 and a half minutes a game, averaged like 3 to 4 points. Just wasn't a big time player. He's a true rookie. You know, it wasn't a surprise that he wasn't a huge player for a team that was very, very good last year. But in just 1 year, his playing time has doubled and pretty much his production has doubled as well. He played 61 games for Denver this year up to this point. He's averaging 9.5 points, just over 2 boards, 1.3 assists, playing 22 minutes a night. He's been a really big, important piece for this team. He's improved defensively. He's a good 3-point shooter. Denver is letting him operate with the ball in his hands. This is something they kind of tried out in the preseason in the summer league. He did really well in kind of a on-ball role, and Denver's let him do that. This is not a role he filled at Gonzaga, but it's a role he's filling very capably in Denver, and it's been fun to see him, and I'm hoping that this knee sprain will get him back in action either before the regular season or at very least get him playing some playoff basketball with Denver this year, because I'm excited to see how he does. Still on the injury train, Domantas Sabonis, grade 1 hamstring strain is the latest update for him with the Sacramento Kings. He played just 1 minute in a game against Houston on March 1st. That's where he suffered the injury. They didn't report it as a strain right away. Apparently, Sacramento has a history of reporting injuries, kind of downplaying injuries, and then about a week later saying, oh, actually, it's a strain. And that's literally, I follow multiple people, the Locked On Kings host, Matt George, who said, they're going to report this as a strain in like 4 days. And they did. So apparently that's a consistent thing with Sacramento. The report is that he's going to be reevaluated in a week, and this came back on March 1st. So it has been about a week. So hopefully there'll be an update soon on Sabonis' status. The Kings are in tank mode after trading De'Aaron Fox. I think there's a very real possibility that the Kings kind of shut it down for the rest of the year, and that could result in them keeping Sabonis out for longer than maybe the injury actually is. That's just something to keep an eye on. Hopefully not the case. Sabonis has played 56 games this year. He needs to play 65 to qualify for All-NBA status. The trend of Domantas Sabonis not making the All-Star game but then making the All-NBA teams will probably continue. If he plays 9 more games, his numbers are absolutely, unquestionably All-NBA material. 19.5 points per game, 14 boards, 6.2 assists, shooting 43% on 2-pointers. Going to be interesting to see what the Kings do with him going forward this year. And then last but not least, most injury-prone of the NBA Zags up to this point in his career, Chet Holmgren, still dealing with a leg injury, has not played since March 3rd. The report this morning was that he is questionable for Oklahoma City's game against the Portland Trailblazers on Friday. So by the time you're listening to this, it may have been announced that he's playing or that he's not playing. But again, he hasn't played since March 3rd. He hasn't missed a ton of time. He missed a huge chunk of the season. He played 10 games and then missed a couple of months with that hip injury, and now he's back. He's played 8 more games, so he's at 18 total games this season. Hopefully gets healthy enough to play against the Trailblazers and then going forward the rest of the season. In those 18 games, Chet is averaging 15 points, 8.5 boards, 2 assists, 2.7 blocks, shooting about 36% from 3. There's no question he's great when he's on the floor. Just the unfortunate foot injury took him out for his rookie year, and then we've had that hip injury that took him out for a huge chunk of this season. He did play every single game in his actual first season last year, all 82 games, so hopefully he can get healthy and finish out the season with the Thunder strong. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Again, a shout out to those everyday listeners, those of you hanging out with me in the Locked On Zags Discord channel, and a special shout out to those of you reading the written content at athlon.com. There's a link in the show notes, whether you're on audio or video. You can click that. It's going to take you to a page, bookmark it, updated Zags information every single day, 3 to 4 articles per day, a go-to source for Gonzaga written content. Thanks again, folks. We'll be back on Monday getting you ready for whomever Gonzaga is going to take on Monday night, either San Francisco, potentially, if another team like Wazoo can make a bit of a run. We'll get a preview of that game. We'll get you ready for the rest of the WCC tournament. Then, of course, Tuesday, get you ready for that championship game, hoping that Gonzaga will be in that game. Thanks again, folks. Have a fantastic weekend. And as always, go Zags.